Well, hello everyone. My name is Ralph. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about careers, startups, and a little bit more. I'm going to give a little bit of an intro on myself before I start. So I graduated with a degree in computer engineering from the University of Waterloo. I've previously worked at Microsoft and five other startups, and I am currently a startup founder and a Y Combinator alumni. For those of you who aren't familiar, Y Combinator is the world's biggest startup accelerator. A lot of tech giants have started at Y Combinator, like DoorDash, Airbnb, Coinbase, and many more. Um, and I had a really great experience there, and I'm excited to teach you guys kind of like part of what I learned there, but also part of what I wish I knew when I was in your position. And there's a lot of things that might not be obvious to you or might not be obvious to you as a student that I definitely didn't know back then, but that I wish that I knew and would have helped me a lot. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. To go over the plan, I'm going to start by talking about the career path and choices you could make as a student and as a new grad. I'm going to talk about some advice for job seeking, some advice for if you have your own idea and you think you might want to do a startup. I'm going to talk a little bit about my startup, Stempad, and how it could be useful to you. And then I'm going to end off with some resume advice and some questionnaire. So let's get started. Career path. So if you're in this room right now, you have likely three things you could do after you graduate, or even during internships during your summer. You could, number one, find a job. You could start a company, or you could do more school. And so the one that you decide very much depends on kind of your outlook on life and what you want out of your life after you graduate. And they are pretty big decisions, so it's important to weigh the pros and cons. I'm going to talk about kind of the implications of each and what might not be obvious is involved in each of these. So first, working a job. There's many great things about working a job. First is you have a guaranteed comfortable income and savings. These are good things. You should want these things. Number two, you get breaks, right? Maybe anything outside of investment banking or being a neurosurgeon, you'll get quite a few breaks. After work, you'll get to completely log off. You can spend time with family during weekends. You'll get paid time off during the year. And that could really help you reset and get a kind of like a work-life balance that you want. And number three, your mistakes have less consequences when you work a job. There's always somebody above you on the chain of hierarchy, unless you're the CEO. And that generally means you have less liability when things go wrong. On the other side, your earning potential is capped. There is always an upper limit, theoretically, on how much you can earn working a job. Number two, you will work for somebody else until you retire. So almost everything that you build will be for somebody else and will not belong to you and will also always be reporting to somebody. Some people don't like that. And number three, which is a direct contrast to the third positive, is that your contributions have less impact. So in general, especially the larger of a company you're working at, the things you do throughout your career are going to have less material impact on users and on the company than you would as a founder. So let's talk about starting a company. And so what are the positives? First, your earning potential is uncapped. There is no limit on how much you can earn other than the global GDP, which is a huge number. I mean, so, like the sky's the limit. Number two, you work for yourself and you could potentially retire early. And number three, your contributions have direct major impact. Every choice you make is going to affect the company and probably all of your users as well. On the other side, you have no guarantee of income or savings if you start a company. You can spend 3 years working really, really hard on something that you love, and at the end of it, the company dies and you have nothing to show for it materially. The second one is you're always on the clock. And what do I mean by this? It doesn't mean that you're always working necessarily, but it always means that your mind or at the back of your mind, you've always got your startup running. You're always thinking about things that are going wrong. There's always going to be something going wrong, always going to be something to think about, and something you could be working on during your downtime. And it can put a real toll on you. And so it's something that you really have to be prepared for and have a commitment for if you do know you want to do a startup. And number three is, well, your contributions have a lot of impact, but your mistakes also have drastic consequences, not just on you, but on your teammates, on your users, on your investors, on your family potentially. So you have all the liabilities on you. The buck stops at you. So that is something that a lot of people struggle to handle, and you have to know about yourself that you can get through these things if you know you want to do a startup. And so picking between those are the two most common choices. When you graduate, it's just going to depend on what you value in life. Do you value your comfort, your work-life balance, stability, normalcy, if you value those things, there's nothing wrong with that, and it's totally respectable to, go through, get a corporate life, go up through the chain of command. That's a completely valid life choice to make. But if you're somebody who likes to create their own thing, somebody who likes to experiment, who likes a little bit of risk, um, a startup might be for you, especially if you have some great ideas. And then there's also the third option, which is doing more school. I'm not going to go too far into this, but if you're someone who wants to do more school, you probably know that about yourself. I would say the best reasons to do more school, to go into a master's and PhD, is do it because you love it, right? You love your field, you love learning, you love academia. Okay, great, go do a master's. I would say don't do it if you're doing it out of practical value. Like in general, the ROI on spending money on a master's and then getting a job after is not nearly at the level at which you could have been if you had just spent that time working a different job. So don't do it because you think, oh, my salary is going to be bigger after I get my PhD or my master's. Do it because, hey, I love this field. I want to learn more about it. And it can be a little bit risky. The work of a master's student and a PhD student can be thankless. It can be really tiring. So it's good to always have a backup plan and always have a safety net, or have at least enough money saved up in case of bad weather. All right, now that we've discussed all the choices you could make, I want to discuss a little bit of career advice for those of you who are going to pursue a tech career after you graduate. And there's a lot of generic advice you're going to receive about, okay, how do you prepare yourself to have a great career and to apply for jobs? And that advice is going to include like side projects, hackathons, internships. You're going to hear a lot of this a lot. And the reason it's such common advice is because it's actually good advice. You should do these things. But the problem is, and I get about a few hundred resumes per week. So I read a lot of resumes. Almost everyone is doing these nowadays. So a lot of it is going to have to depend on how unique you are as a candidate and your individual advantages. And it is a numbers game. Like it's partly chance. So you're going to have to cast as wide a net as possible, and you're going to get rejected almost every single time as a junior. Don't look too deep into rejections. I see so many juniors having like companies that they love, and opportunities that they thought they would be perfect fit for, and then they start analyzing why they got rejected, start changing their resume because they got rejected. Rejections mean very little in this economy. So don't give up. Cast as wide of a net as possible. Apply to as many jobs as you can. The ones that you do care about a lot, maybe put a little bit more time into those applications. But in general, you shouldn't be spending too much time on your applications. Just apply, move on, and don't emotionally attach yourself to a job until you get it, of course. And I would say a bit of unconventional advice too is use every advantage you have, right? So let's say if you have a family member that knows somebody, a manager at a company, get them to put you a good word in. If you are part of an underrepresented group in STEM, use that to your advantage, right? Um, there's many things that you can use kind of to get like an edge. And if you're not doing those things, other people are going to be, and you're going to be at a disadvantage. So everything that you can do to get an unfair advantage over other people who are also applying to a role that you want, do those things, right? Um, and there's kind of like different strategies that you can do when applying to startups versus large corporations. And a lot of the things that I discussed earlier of working at a startup versus working at a large corp still apply when you're an employee. Like at a startup, you'll likely have more responsibility, do more interesting things, have more liability. But again, it can be riskier. If the startup dies, you'll be out of your job. At a corp, there's more stability, more safety, and likely higher pay. Um, so those things still apply. But the difference in how you apply to those things, so like let's say you're applying to a startup versus a large corporation, your applications can actually look a little bit different and be tailored a little bit differently. So if you know you want to work at a startup and you have an idea of that startup, you know what their product is and you kind of know you want to work there. What startups look for, and I know this from experience, they generally look for a very specific tech stack and industry fit, right? So if you know the tech stack of the startup, if you know the industry of the startup, communicate that in your application, right? So if it's a startup for an FPGA developer, don't tell them that you know React. Don't tell them that you like they don't care that you love React. Or if you are applying to be a web developer, don't tell them that you built an AI ML pipeline as a cool project, right? They want to hear what you've done with their tech stack, and they want to hear that you know their industry and love their product. So they want a very specific fit and a mold to know that you'll be able to work right away and you won't need very much onboarding. At a large corp, this is a little bit different. They're generally looking for a more holistic vision of you. They're looking for, okay, what kind of projects have you done? Is this person capable? They're looking for any evidence of that. So any project with any language, any tech stack generally is going to be applicable and in your benefit when you're applying to like a FAANG company or a large corporation. Versus on the other hand, giving too much information is almost bad for a startup. Like you're almost diluting your value. So I would say, depending on the size of the company, try to tailor your applications there. You can even have like different versions of your resume for like a startup with this stack or a startup with that stack or a large corporation. So try to keep those versions handy and so you don't need to spend too much time when applying. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about resumes towards the end, but right now I'm going to talk a little bit about startups. Um, and so this is one of the mottos of YC. And YC, and that's Y Combinator, often says build something that people want. And then in contrast, it means don't build something that no one wants, right? And this sounds like really obvious advice, right? If you have an idea, obviously you're going to want to build it in a way that people want to use it, but you'd be surprised at how many people get this wrong. And one of the most common causes of startups failing is people spend a lot of time, a year, 2 years, building something that they think people want and building features that they think people are going to use, and then it flops. Nobody actually uses it. And so there's many ways to ensure that you actually have an idea that people are going to want to use and that has merit. One of the main ones is talking to users, right? And I actually, for my own startup, got this wrong when I started. Um, a lot of people are very protective of their startup idea. They don't want to share it too much. They're afraid to talk to people about it because they're afraid it's gonna get stolen or it's gonna get criticized. This is absolutely the wrong way to go about it, and this is a big mistake. The earlier you can talk to users and start talking to people about your idea, the better, right? So even as soon as you get your idea and you have an idea of who your target market is, start talking to those people, right? Start asking them, okay, what do you think about this idea? Is this something that you think you would use? Is this something that you think you would pay for? All this information is valuable. And as you start building, while you're building, talk to users. See how they think about your idea. See what they think about your product. As soon as you have an MVP ready that you think people might use and might find useful, release it. Launch that MVP. Don't be afraid to launch. It's such a common mistake startup founders make is they have an idea, they think it's great, but they're afraid to launch it because they're afraid it has too many bugs. People aren't going to like it. People are going to criticize it. Bugs are often very much overestimated by founders and very much ignored by users. If they like your idea and they like your product, they're not going to remember the bugs. They're going to remember what they like about your product. And if it is too buggy and nobody wants it, then that's valuable information as well. You just saved yourself time that you would have spent working on a product that people don't actually use, and you caught it very early and you can fix that problem very early. So it will save you time and it will help you mold your idea to something that people are going to use and pay for. And the third, I guess, piece of advice I would give if you have an idea and you want to do a startup is pick a KPI and roll with it. And what does this mean? So a KPI stands for key performance indicator. It's a fancy way of saying like a statistic. So for example, for my startup Stempad, the KPI that I picked is active users. So every week, every month, I check how many active users do I have this week, and I make sure that that number goes up every week. If the number's going up, great, I'm doing a good job. If it's not, then something's wrong and I have to fix it. Uh, Again, lots of people get this wrong. It's so important to keep track of your metrics and keep track of your analytics, and stay on top of them and realize when things aren't going up and fix it when it's not going up, right? Startups are actually very simple. You talk to users, build something people want, and make sure your startup is growing every month. If you do these things, you are much higher likelihood to succeed, right? And the statistics is thrown around a lot about, okay, 9 out of 10 startups fail. But you have to understand, like 9 out of 10 startups do a lot of these things wrong, and that statistic doesn't apply to you if you're doing just a few simple things, right? So don't be discouraged by that, I would say, especially if you have any ideas and you think you might be a natural startup founder when you graduate. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Stempad. And Stempad is something that I started building around January of this year. I built it in my last term of school. And the reason I built it is because I wanted a way to write my scientific notes or type my scientific notes just as quickly as if I was writing them by hand. And I had a big problems with the tools that existed in the market. Like I've tried LaTeX in the past, I've tried Notion, Word, but those tools don't really work well for math. They don't work well for science. LaTeX is really difficult to learn. Um, and so I had a problem myself. Like I had my own problem that I was trying to solve. That's always a great way to have an idea. If you have the problem yourself, then you know that there's people in the market that have a problem. And so that was my problem. And so I decided to create a scientific notepad. Initially, I actually just created it for myself. I was using it to take notes in class for my physics classes, my computer engineering classes, my math classes especially. And it was going pretty well. But what happened is people started seeing me use it and started asking about it. And that's when I decided I actually started I launched very simply. I just made a post on the Waterloo subreddit about Stempad. And then immediately that's when it started taking off. A lot of students started using it. People started sharing it with each other. And that's kind of when I realized, okay, there's potential for this um, as like a full company, right? When I graduate. And it was actually a pretty difficult decision for me because I already had a job lined up. I was graduating in a month. I had my whole life planned out. I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this job. I succeeded, like I did my 4 years, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Um, and this startup just kind of came and just changed everything for me, especially after getting into Y Combinator. So I applied to Y Combinator around a month after I started building Stempad. I forgot that I applied. They got back to me, and then that's kind of when the whirlwind happened and my life completely changed. And here I am now. I'm working on Stempad, and I'd love to show it to you guys actually a little bit because I think you guys could find real value from it as STEM students. And if you have any questions at the end about the tech or how I built this or anything about Stempad, I'm happy to answer it. But to kind of give you some context, Stempad, it's completely web-based. You don't have to sign up to use it. So I'm currently just in slash editor. Um, and it's very similar to Notion where I made it so that you can very easily add blocks. So let's say I just add a heading and I could just start typing. And if I want to include math, I could do slash math. And there we go. I've got my math block. And I made it so that every keystroke kind of intuitively creates what you want it to create. So let's say I do 2 and I put a slash symbol that creates a fraction. If I do SQRT, there's a square root. INT creates an integral, up arrow to go through the bounds. Um, and so it's very straightforward how Stempad can be used. And it can also be used for graphs or any other sort of visualizations. Uh, let's take a look. And this is actually integrated Desmos within the editor. So if I go here and I do like x squared, for example, and there we go. I've got my plot. Got a bit smaller. I can even do something like coding. So let's say I go in, I put in a code block. And the nice thing is also, and that a lot of tools don't have, is that you can actually run code. Um, so if I do, a little slow today. There we go. I've got a plot. There's also things like spreadsheets, and there's many blocks really that you can experiment with. Um, and I built it to make it kind of, I had the philosophy, and this was my original hypothesis, and I actually made the mistake myself of not talking to that many users when I started. I ended up getting lucky and being right that people would find this useful, but I had the philosophy of there is no speed of thought scientific writing tool on the market, and if I create it, then it's going to be big. Like that was my hypothesis, and it turned out to go okay. And yeah, that's what I've been building so far for the last 9 months now. So it's been kind of my life, and let's see here. This is the newest block that I created. Um, and it's the spreadsheet block. It works very similar to Excel where you can kind of even use formulas. So let's say I just do 1, and then I can insert kind of a chart here. And there we go. So I'm not going to spend too long on this, but kind of that's how the editor mostly works. I think you can find a lot of use from this. And this is what I'm doing right now. I'm following my own advice. I'm talking to users in real time, and I think you guys could find good use case from it. I'll include some links after on how you could use Stempad and join the Discord server. And kind of you can talk to me directly, give me feedback. Your feedback is actually really, really valuable to me. So if you have any time to try it out, I'd love to answer any questions you have. But yeah, that's Stempad, and that's kind of what I've been building. And we are actually hiring right now. We're hiring both junior and senior engineers. So if you think it's something that you'd be interested in working in and you kind of like building for web and building editors, feel free to reach out to me directly. Tell me that you were part of this talk. I will open your message because I do get a lot of messages. But moving on, let's talk about resumes. So I have some examples here of bad resume templates. And how I actually found these resumes was I looked up resume template on Google, and these were like almost all the initial results look like this, something like this. And the thing about these kinds of resumes is they look very good, right? And so on first glance, especially to junior, it might seem like, okay, these are great resumes. I'm just going to take one of those templates and just use it, put in my own picture, put in my own information, and call it a day. Um, and the problem is these resumes can work well for other disciplines like graphic design or any of like the non-tech disciplines. I can't really speak for those, but in tech and in engineering especially, these kind of resumes have a lot of things that are bad about them, and that might not be obvious to you initially. And so the first one is that they put the focus on the wrong thing, right? So you want your resume to look as average and plain as possible. And what do I mean by this? When your resume looks something like this, a lot of the attention of the recruiter is going to be on the designs and on the white space, and you're not really going to grab their attention with your content as much. Recruiters spend on average around like 10 to 20 seconds looking at a resume, and that's on the higher end before they like throw it away because I have to get through so many resumes a day. I personally like scan a resume for like 5 seconds until I know is it worth reading more or is it just something that I need to move on from, right? And so what you really want to do is do something more like this. And it seems very counterintuitive. A lot of people get very attached to their resumes and the templates that they have, and it looks really pretty. And they kind of, I can see it in their eyes, are reluctant to move on to a resume like that, to a resume like this. Um, and there's a few things that are great about this resume. First, there's no color, there's no images, and the focus is on the content, the focus is on the bullets. A recruiter is going to look at this and it's going to be very easy to read it from top to bottom. They're going to see your name, they're going to see your info, and at the top, they're going to see your skills. This is what an HR recruiter, especially at a large company, is going to do. They're going to look at your skills, they're going to see, okay, do they have the tech that we use? Great. Okay, I'll keep using it. No, okay, I'll move on to the next resume. They look at your experience. Okay, they'll scan your bullet points for a few seconds. They'll see, okay, does it name the tech that we use? Does it look like work that's meaningful and interesting? They'll go down the resume, and then in a few seconds, they get a very good idea of your tech skills and your experience in your job and your career without having to navigate like multiple columns. Very simple. And another thing that also helps with this kind of resume is recruiters are kind of biased to prefer resumes like these because oftentimes the best candidates and the most experienced candidates will have very plain looking resumes, which is very counterintuitive, but they associate those resumes, and I do too. Like when I see a resume that has the exact template as this, I associate that with, okay, this person is more likely to know what they're talking about because they're using a resume template that they know I'm going to be able to focus on better. Um, so definitely stay away from the fancy graphics, the images, the colors, and try to have your resume as clean and cut as possible. Um, Another thing is attention to detail. This is something that's often missed. So spelling mistakes, having periods on some bullet points but not periods on others, those little things show that you don't have as much attention to detail, which is a very important skill in a lot of jobs. So make sure it's very polished, your wording is very consistent. If you're not a native English speaker, get a native English speaker to read over your resume. Basic things like that will very greatly increase your chance of succeeding. And it is a numbers game. Getting into a big company is partly skill, but partly, oh, the recruiter picked up my resume that day. They just picked it up and they decided to read it all. Every little thing you do to increase the chance that a recruiter will read your resume fully and understand it is better. Another thing that goes along with that is make your bullet points as short as possible and as concise as possible. If you can say something in 15 words that you could also say in 30 words, choose the 15-word version, right? Choose always a shorter version. You don't have to use full sentences in resumes. Use that to your advantage, right? Um, so keep it short, keep it concise. Don't make the margins too narrow. Include only the necessary things and nothing more. And you'll have a much greater chance of getting your resume read and getting the interview. And once you do get the interview, your chances of getting the job astronomically increases. So definitely focus on these things and try to get a nice, clean, polished resume. And that's it for today. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. This QR code also has a lot of links on how you directly can contact me, how to use Stempad, how to join the Discord server. Please join the Discord. I'm available like almost 24/7 there if you have any questions for me. And yeah, I'll open it up to questions.
So I have a question. So as a CEO of your company, right? So what kind of things, like more business side do you do rather than just programming?
Yeah, so business side, there's a lot of stuff to do. And it can kind of get hard sometimes to balance programming and doing the business side. And this can depend between whether you're a B2B company or B2C company. And what that means is a B2B company will target businesses and they want to sell to businesses. So if you're a B2B company, you're going to be doing a lot of sales and a lot of outreach. And what that means is you're going to be sending a lot of cold emails to managers or decision makers at companies. You're going to go to conferences and try to find key decision makers and try to sell your product as a package to a company. So a lot of outreach directly to companies is going to be what it looks like for more business oriented companies. For Stempad, on the other hand, we like are direct to consumer, so we talk to individuals directly and we sell and market to individuals. So a lot of what I do is marketing work. So I've created graphics and videos for ads, for example, that some of you might have seen. Um, I do a lot of outreach like this, so I do workshops. I talk to students directly. Um, I do a lot of social media, like marketing a lot of my user acquisition at the beginning, the way I got my first like 10K users or 10K people to try the product is a lot of Reddit outreach, Hacker News. I posted on Twitter a bit. I posted on LinkedIn. And so those kinds of things are the most important business things I do outside. There's also the administrative stuff, like I make sure the company is incorporated. Um, I there's hiring as well, reading resumes. But really, the most important stuff that I do is stuff that I do to raise my KPI, which is active users. And so that is outreach, just reaching out and being in direct contact with my users.
Good. Yeah. Have you ever considered trying to sell your startup to like a bigger company and then move on to another project?
Um, sure, that's called exiting. Um, so it's very uncommon to have an exit in under a year. That generally is not a very good sign. So my exit is not on my mind right now. It's probably many years down the line. There's really two big success stories for startups, and that is a big exit, so you're selling for a lot of money after having acquired a lot of users, and the other one is an IPO where your company goes public. But those are two are generally pretty down the line.
So for Stempad, do you have like a page like with documentation for people that like have never like I guess used Stempad before, so that way they can be able to know, hey, I want to be able to do this in Stempad. Like for example, like with like a lot of like code nowadays, is there like a database which documents how you can do certain functions for Stempad?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, um, while you're in the editor, whatever block you're on, you'll see this little handy learn icon on the bottom right. And it'll
Mhm.
actually give you a lot of commands and things that you can do. So let's say I want to know how to do an integral on map. I can see here, okay, it's int. There's also a learn page. So there's full documentation here. It talks about every one of the blocks, all of the shortcuts. Shortcuts are amazing. Please use the shortcuts. And yeah, so slash learn and also the learn box on the right.
And this works with both Mac and Windows, right?
Correct. It's web-based, so you just need a browser. You can
Oh,
even
okay, because
technically
I
do it on
just
your
saw
phone.
the Windows like or my bad, the Mac like keys, so I was just wondering about that. Thank you.
Oh yeah, no worries. No worries.
So when you're working on a document, let's say you have like several subjects that you're working on. Um, I know that I've read that you guys have like some kind of server to store some of these on, but could you save it on your computer as well and come back to it later on the same website?
Yeah, so one way is using the cloud. So we have something very similar to Google Drive where you sign up and you can save documents in the cloud. Um, Offline mode is coming eventually. I'm gonna release an app for this where you can have an offline version. But for now, if you don't want to sign up, or let's say you just want it on your computer, you see I'm on slash editor right now, so standby.com/editor. If I refresh, it's actually still going to be here. So in the scratch pad, and this is called the scratch pad, it saves locally on your computer, but it's currently only limited to one document for local and as many documents as you want for cloud. But yeah, offline mode and a full app is coming on the roadmap.
Why use Desmos like for calculate? Is it just because like you can do a lot of things like graphing and all that too, like compared to like something like MathAway or PhotoMath?
Yeah, so Desmos was partly a personal choice. I mean, I used Desmos a lot before I created Stempad. And my philosophy around blocks too, when I'm creating them, is if there's something that exists that I can kind of lean on and use that people already love, I'm not going to recreate the wheel. So that's the case with something like the graph block, where Desmos has made a great calculator and great graphing calculator, especially.
Yeah.
And you have an API that allows you to integrate it really easily. So I just went with that.
Do you plan on integrating like with like different calculators, or does that kind of defeat the purpose of like being simple and straight to the point?
That's a very good question. So right now, um, you can the math block can has calculation capabilities. The graph block does too, and so does the code block. You can run your code. Um, in terms of the future, so I never want to stray away from STEMPAD is supposed to be simple, accessible to everyone, and the focus is speed and user experience. That's always going to be true for STEMPAD. Um, for it to be used by especially certain disciplines and certain researchers in industry and scientists, some of them want more sophisticated and advanced features. Those will be added, but they will be added in a way so as to not mask the simplicity of the tool. And that takes a certain art in the way that you design the user experience. But it is possible to build STEMPad, and that's my plan, into something that's very sophisticated, but also remains simple and easy to use.
For the code block as well, since I work with MATLAB a lot, and currently we're doing a lot of signal analysis. So does that work with MATLAB too in seeing its functions?
Yeah, all Matplotlib. So this is Matplotlib. Um, but MATLAB is not currently runnable. But that is something that's a decent feature request, and it might be possible to run MATLAB within the browser. I think they are proprietary, so I'm going to look into that, but it's definitely something that's possible.
So I know that for some classes, teachers will have like really small graphs or like on bigger than a board. Is there an easy way for that to get into notes here? Or is that not?
So let me make sure I heard that right. So a way to get a picture to turn into a Stampad document, is that, did I hear that right?
Uh, that's I guess the first step. Yeah, but like in I guess long term, like let's say the professor like writing like a very complicated like diagram on the board, and you can't like draw it that easily. I guess within a short amount of time. Um, is there a way to make it easier or faster for users? Percent
Yeah, so that's a good question. So a big part of the reason that people use Stampad today is they use it to do class notes. And it could take a little bit, like any new tool, once you start to learn it and get better at it, it becomes a lot easier to use it quickly. Um, so there are many features on the roadmap to make things faster. One of them is the ability to convert images using AI into STEMPad. So let's say you take an image of the whiteboard or of an equation or a drawing or whatever it is, and you just paste that into Stempad, it can convert that into notes and documentation. So that's one thing. Another one is the draw block, which is the most free of all the blocks, where you literally can use your stylus and you could just start drawing into it. So there is the classic capabilities of any other notepad where you could just take up a stylus if you want to and you have a touch screen. Um, so that also makes it easier. And anything I could do to make it easier and faster for my users is something that is very important to me. I get a lot of feedback every day on my Discord about like little things to make someone's workflow a little bit easier, and those things I prioritize well. So if you do end up using it and you do have your own qualms or own feature requests, please reach out. They do get prioritized.
Cool, awesome, thank you.
how often do you anticipate working with Stempad, and do you have an idea of what you might want to do after?
So how long do I intend or have an idea of how long I'm going to work on Stempad and what am I going to do after?
Yeah.
Um, so in general, I intend to work on Stempad for a long time, perhaps the next 5 to 10 years. So I have the amount of funding that Stempad got in its seed round allows it to survive for at least the next several years before it needs another round of funding or is profitable enough to survive on its own. So I plan to make this my life's work actually. And that's the plan for a lot of startup founders. Of course, there's always the possibility of failure. There's always the possibility that you do run out of money or you do need to shift to something else. So let's say in that worst case scenario where, okay, 5 years, 10 years from now, either Stempad exits, let's say, so the happy ending, or let's say Stempad runs out of funding. There's always the possibility that I start on my next idea, I create another idea, or I'm not close to the idea of a job far down the line if I decide to do that. But right now, the plan is Stempad all the way.
In hiring people to this startup, what is your vision and who would you like their per their who do you expect to like hire and what do you think you expect or what do you think you would expect out of someone who would be working for you at Stempad? Like for example, like behaviors, like personality, etc.
Yeah, so what do I look for in my hires out of their personality and their skills? That's a good question. Um, it depends a little bit on the role, but in general, I do look for them to be startup oriented. And what that means is that they're generally gonna be very excited about the product. They love startup environments, so they like working in small teams. They like taking ownership of the work that they do. So they're not going to get as detailed and as concrete, kind of like a plan or like rules on how to follow their job or tasks to do, right? They're going to be very self-driven people. So I look for those things. Evidence of that is how excited I can tell they are about the startup, how excited they are about the work, about the product. I can tell that also by how many startups they've worked at in the past. If somebody has a track record of working at startups, if they've worked at successful startups before or had their own startup, those are all very green signals to me that this person is a good like startup employee or startup founder material kind of thing. So I do look for that. In terms of on the tech side, when I'm hiring for engineers, I look for tech stack fits. I have very little time to spend kind of training somebody or teaching somebody the tech that I use. So the more familiar they are with what I'm doing, the faster it will be for them to start having impact. And so that's what I look for on the tech side as well.
Thank you.
You said you worked for Microsoft, right? For a bit. So
Mhm.
did you work for them first before eventually transitioning to like I forgot what the name, the Y, like
Y Combinator?
yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's a good question.
choose them?
Mhm.
Did you choose them after you worked at Microsoft, or you just immediately switched soon after?
Yeah, sure. So I've worked at several startups and also Microsoft. All of those were before Y Combinator. Um, when I had my graduation plan and I was going to graduate, I actually had a new grad offer lined up at Microsoft. So my plan was to keep working at Microsoft. That's when I got accepted into Y Combinator, and that's when I turned down the offer and decided to do Y Combinator.
And that means you're like almost like recent grad, right? Because you or did you work a couple of startups and Y Combinator first before kind of switch transitioning to STEMPad, or did you just work immediately on STEMPad after?
I worked immediately on Stempad. I went straight from school to working on Stempad and doing Y Combinator. Thank you. I hope you guys got something from this. And again, if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out.